was that they mobilized the fire brigade and spent a fortune on a rescue operation to get the rat out of his position in the manhole cover. They did that, and then the rat jumped down back into the sewer. The chances that rat if you can imagine you are that rat, imagine the improbability of A, getting stuck in a manhole cover in a city, in a street in Germany, and then being rescued by the German fire brigade, only to return to the sewer. Improbable event number one. Not Now, there's an island called Suaré, just off the coast of Brazil. And there's the main city in that island is actually built in the mangrove forests. And the people get out of their accommodation every day and they walk into the mangrove forest and try and pick the fruit off the Avocacia marina bush. I did my research on mangrove trees and fruits before I came here tonight. But yesterday, when they went into the mangrove forest to try and pick their fruits, they came across a humpback whale. How improbable is that? If you're out to pick your daily fruit and you come across the carcass of a humpback whale in the middle of a mangrove forest. Actually, what happened was the humpback whale died of starvation out at sea, filled up with gas, and then on a massive 14-foot tide was carried onto the island, sunk into the mangrove swamp, and away the tide went, leaving the carcass of the whale in the middle for the villagers to ponder about. Point is, if you're that whale, did you really imagine that your remains would be left in the middle of a Brazilian mangrove forest? Unlikely. This is another one that's unlikely. This was in USA Today. Oh, I should say, incidentally, I haven't got a spurious news agency here, and that I'm just picking them all out of. This is the BBC News, this is CNN, and this one is USA Today, all respected news agencies. This is in Lake Tahoe in California. They had an unprecedented overnight snowfall a couple of nights ago. The snow was so deep, it covered the cars. You can see there how much snow's fallen overnight. Unprecedented, they said. Never happened before in such a short space of time. Well, what was happening was that the snowplow here was trying to clear the road. It was a road that you shouldn't be parking on, and it knocked something. It could have easily have gone on, but the driver thought, oh no, I've knocked something. Let's get out of my cab and see what's going on. So they investigated, they found a car. In the car, they found a woman who had fallen asleep. And of course, they managed to launch an operation to get the woman out, and she did, and she was fine. Story was she was a homeless woman, and she was living in the car. She parked illegally down this street in the hope that nobody would find her. But guess what? She's damn glad they did in the end. She fell asleep and woke up covered in snow. This one is not a news event, but it was in the news this week, and it caught my attention. Because again, I think it's another highly probable event. This is Najat Valoud Belkacem, who was in Morocco as a young girl, and as a teenager she was herding sheep and goats. So here she is at the age of about 11 or 12, 30 years on now, she's 41 years old now. She is a socialist politician and the Minister for Education in France. So how probable is it that somebody who, as a young girl, was herding sheep in Morocco, is now running the entire education system of France? So all these events then are highly improbable. But the events that I've given you are just 3 or 4 examples of events that interrupt our time. These events happen, our life goes on, and they happen again, and another one happens, and so on. But actually, it's constantly happening. If you think, just for a second, if you think of where you are right now, the position you are sitting in, whether you've got your arms folded or whether you've got your legs crossed, the people that are sitting around you, the noises you are hearing, the scents that you are smelling, all that situation you are now in, if you could take a mental snapshot of it and just freeze time for a second and ask yourself, given all the other probabilities and possibilities and permutations that could have happened, what is the probability of me being in this exact situation, in this exact position, surrounded by these people in that exact position right now at this moment in time? And it's probably incalculable. Lewis Thomas is an eminent US physician and essayist, and he said that statistically, the probability of any one of us being here is so small that you'd think the mere fact of existing would keep us all in a contented dazzlement of surprise. What he's referring to is our genetic makeup. our DNA. And he's highlighting the fact that your DNA is absolutely unique to you. And of the billions and billions of other human beings that make up the world's population, nobody else, unless you're identical twin, nobody else shares your DNA. Furthermore, nobody in the past has ever shared your DNA, and nobody in the future will share your DNA. You are absolutely unique. Not only that, he's saying, if you look at your DNA, the way that it is made up, the chemical structure of that DNA, the order of all the little nucleotides, the building bricks that make that up, the ones that you've got are actually one in countless other millions of possibilities during cell division and the process of meiosis. So that means that we are entirely improbable people, and I'm going to suggest that we live in an entirely improbable world, and therefore I would question the value of trying to second guess the occurrence of events that haven't happened yet. In order for us to do that, we as risk managers are in an awful position actually, because our whole job is clouded with uncertainty. We have to give advice and recommendations on events that we can't possibly accurately know the probability of occurrence of. Not only that, the events that we have to predict are themselves probably conditional upon other events that have to occur firsthand. So let's just look. It's a very simple model. There's no science in it at all. There's no science in it, so you can easily pull this apart. It's just food for thought, really. I just knocked it together to look at, if we looked at the predictability of events and how much control we had over those events, we'd be in a far better position if we could have full predictability and full control. We'd be in a far better position to predict the future occurrence of events. So, if we've got full control over events that we can completely predict, these are conscious and deliberate actions taken by you. So if I decide I'm going to stand on that square, there you go, I predicted I'd stand on that square, I've taken a conscious action to do so, and therefore I'm on that square. So high predictability and high control. Down at the bottom here, of course, these are the events that you have absolutely no idea at all that are occurring. It's the rat a couple of days ago that was getting stuck in a manhole cover on a street in Germany. You had absolutely no way of knowing that, but it's occurring. It's the snowfall in Lake Tahoe a couple of nights ago that you had absolutely no idea was occurring. It didn't really affect you, but you've got no control over them and you couldn't predict them. Tomorrow's weather, you've probably got a certain amount of predictability over, given the modelling, and that's something I'm going to mention in just a minute, but you've got no control over the weather. Your subconscious, you have a certain amount of control over your subconscious, but you can't predict it. That's the whole point of subconscious actions. You don't know they're going to happen. You can control them to an extent, but you don't know that they're going to happen. Sports results. Sports results, you have no control. If your favourite team is playing a game of football this weekend, you've got no control over whether they win or lose, but based on past performance and the state of the players at the time, you might be able to make some prediction about the team, how the team is going to behave. And finally, your health. We have some control over our health because we have a certain amount of control over our lifestyle. But there's other things that could happen to us that we have no control over. And we can make a certain amount of predictability based upon statistical records on the occurrence of disease and so on. So we have decreasing uncertainty as we go to higher predictability and higher control, and we have increasing risk of those things in the opposite direction. Bear with me a second, please. Nassim Taleb down here, look at the events that you don't know anything about at all. Nassim Taleb, I'm sure you've all heard of him. He's the guy that defined black swan events, and he defined them by 3 criteria. One, they're absolutely and entirely unpredictable. A lot of people forget that bit. They think they are low probability, high impact. Well, they're not. You can't predict the probability because they're absolutely unpredictable. That's the point. Second thing, they will always do you harm. And third thing, you can always explain them with hindsight. So that's the 3 things that Taleb used to define black swan. I wonder how he would define events that are entirely unpredictable but didn't actually do you harm. In fact, they could actually do you good. And thirdly, even despite their occurrence, they remained entirely unpredictable. And those are the kind of events, I think, that govern our lives. That's the tapestry in which we build our lives. And I would call those events wonderful. And if you think in how your life has been, it will be full of wonderful, unpredictable events. If I can just illustrate that with a question. How much in control are we? Now, I'm going to use a simple example here. I may get my head bitten off for it, but it's quite an effective example. Bear with me. Those of us that are married, how many times have you thought to yourself, how on earth did I end up with that person as my partner? Because at some point in your life, you had absolutely no idea that that person existed. So you could never ever have predicted that you would be even planning to spend the rest of your life with somebody that didn't even exist. You may say, yeah, but I made that choice, or we made that choice to get married. Yes, but before you made that choice, you had to meet up. There was a set of circumstances that came into being, and improbably you find yourself in the same situation as this other person. Your worlds have collided, and you have now a love story that ends up in marriage, and you spend the rest of your life together. But was it entirely predictable? Given the numbers of men or the numbers of women in the world at the moment, you ended up with that one. That sometimes reminds me as if you haven't seen the film Casablanca, by the way, I suggest you all do it. It's a fantastic film based in Morocco, where Humphrey Bogart is a owner of a bar called Rick's. And one day, he's quite happy in the bar there, and one day an ex-flame of his walks in with her new husband, and from then on his entire life is in turmoil as he tries to protect his ex-wife and his ex-wife's husband from all the dangers in Morocco in the early stages of the Second World War. So he comforts himself trying to make sense of it one night, and he bangs the bar and says a very famous quote: "Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine." Now I don't know how many gin joints there were in the beginning of World War II, or how many towns there were, but the point is one of improbability. He's saying she had the entire world's portfolio of gin joints to walk into. Why did she pick on me? Why does she have to walk into my one? An entirely improbable event. I was in conversation recently with somebody who's actually well known at the Business Continuity Institute, and we were having a discussion about whether or not we should use likelihood in our assessment of risk. And he was arguing that we should. His argument was that we are risk managers, we deal with uncertainty. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong, but actually, as long as we get it right most of the time, we're doing a good job, his philosophy. He even quoted the Meteorological Office in the UK as a model of good practice. He said their forecasting and their prediction of future events is actually very, very good, and they get the weather right 80% of the time. So there. And I thought to myself, if I've got to make a big business decision based on the advice from somebody who gets it wrong 20% of the time, I'd be a bit uncomfortable with that. If I had to award a major contract to a company to carry out some work on some critical infrastructure in a high-risk environment, but the statistics told me that 20% of the time they were involved in an incident, I'd be very uncomfortable with that. So I'm not sure that getting it right 80% of the time is actually a good statistic. Of course, we all recognise that risk is founded in uncertainty, and you can't be 100% confident in anything that you advise, because that's the nature of risk. I mean, you can only be certain about the occurrence of an event after the event's taken place, or in the future where there's only one possible outcome. So if I've got a coin and it's a double-headed coin and I flip the coin, it's going to come down heads. So I can be pretty certain about that. But they're the only times you can be 100% certain about an event. Oh, before anybody puts up their hands and says, yeah, we can flip the coin, but it might land on its edge. Or the other one I've heard is, yes, you can flip the coin, but it might get stuck at the ceiling, it might not come down. Okay, yeah. So we'll deal with something called reasonable in a minute, about reasonable risk. But let me talk a little bit about that uncertainty and the probability of events occurring. The more possible outcomes of an event, the more uncertain the event is. So let's go back to our single-headed coin. We flip it. We're 100% certain it's going to come down heads. That's okay. But let's take a fair coin with heads and tails. We flip it once, so the event is a single flip, and the outcome is either heads or tails. So there's probability of 0.5 it being either heads or tails. If you flip that coin twice, there's now 4 possible outcomes: heads, heads, tails, tails, heads, tails, or tails, heads. So now the probability of getting only heads is reduced to 0.25 because it's 1 in 4 chances now. And you can carry that theory on and on and on to infinite levels, working out the probabilities of multiple events. And there was a guy called Blaise Pascal, you may have heard of. Blaise Pascal, 18th century Renaissance. There's a story behind this, but if you're interested in the story where this came from, I can tell you over the break. And this is became known as Pascal's triangle. It's a way of predicting the probability of events that could have multiple outcomes. Actually, 400 years prior to Pascal, this was discovered by a Chinese guy called Yang Hui, and in parts of China it's known as the Yang Hui triangle, not the Pascal's triangle. But the point is, if you go, this is our 100% certainty event. This is our single-headed coin. Here's our 50-50 chance. Here's our 1 in 4 chance of getting heads. This is a 1 in 8 chance of getting heads. If you come down to here, there's a 1 in 16 chance. Now, let's talk about girls and boys. When my wife and I were planning our family, because I was a risk manager and I was interested in the probability of having a boy, I got out my Pascal's triangle and I worked out what is the probability of me having a boy if we have 4 children. And the probability of having a boy if you have 4 children is over 93%. Same as probability of having girls, over 93%. So on that basis, of course, I bought blue paint and painted one of the rooms in the house blue. Actual fact, I got 4 girls and had to repaint the room pink. Another example of an entirely improbable but wonderful event. You can carry on Pascal's triangle all the way down. If you get to the 10th row down here, the chances of each event is 1 in 1,024. So think of it simple. If I get a coin, it's got 2 outcomes, heads or tails. If I flip it 10 times, what is the probability of me getting either one of those sequences? This one is a random sequence which have equal amount of heads and tails, and this one is all heads. So if I flip a coin 10 times, what's the probability of me having a sequence which is all heads? And the answer is very, very low. It's 1 in 1,024 is the probability of me getting one in all heads. But here's the thing. The probability of me getting this, or any other combination or permutation, is still the same. It's 1 in 1,024. So, if you're still not convinced, look at this one. This is a classical deck of playing cards, hearts, clubs, diamonds, spades, all laid out there in the seniority order of the suite, and all laid out in their numerical order: ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, king, and so on. If I took a pack of playing cards right now and shuffled it at random, just shuffle those cards, what would be the probability of the sequence of cards I got being that? The answer is 1 in 10 trillion, 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 trillion. Now I know that's not a mathematical number, but I don't know what the mathematical number for 6 trillions is. It's very, very low probability though. Shuffling the pack of cards and to get that sequence of cards in the outcome is 1 in 6 trillions. But here's the thing, It's the same as the coin. It's the same as the coin. Every time you shuffle that deck of cards, every sequence you get has that probability, 1 in 6 trillion. So if you want to demonstrate to somebody the occurrence of highly improbable events, just shuffle a pack of cards. It doesn't get any more improbable than that. Incidentally, some books, if you see this, they will say, this 10 and 6 trillions, this is more than the number of atoms in the universe. In the universe. Well, I don't know quite how they counted all the atoms in the universe, but I think that the point is still there, that it's highly, highly improbable. And with this improbability, we have to address it somehow, and some models are better than others, and I won't go into them all. But this one, certainly some of us should be familiar with. This is a Monte Carlo simulation. We like Monte Carlo simulations because they never give you the answer. That's why we like them so much. They just give you an area of uncertainty and a range of possible outcomes. That's what they do. They give you, given all the factors and given all the inputs, this is the best distribution of outcomes I've got. And I'm 95% certain, or I have 95% certainty, that if this event happens, the loss to our business will be between X and Y. Thank you very much. That's very helpful indeed. What we don't understand, though, is that events and mathematical models are all extremely clever, and they do have their place, and I don't want to belittle Monte Carlo. It's a fantastic tool, actually. But here's my thing. If I'm walking home tonight, and I stand on a rock and twist my ankle, I'm not interested that there was a 95% probability that I would get a home incident and injury-free. All I know is I've got a sore ankle. It's happened, the event has happened, I've damaged my ankle, now I've got to manage it, I've got to deal with it. Is it any use telling me the probability of that event before it's happened? So, with all this, I'll come on to that in a sec, with all this uncertainty and doubt, how do we define risk? Well, here is how all the established bodies define risk. I'm sure you're all familiar with them, especially the ISO one. Uncertainty on objectives, we like that one. Possibility that events could occur, we like this a lot so far, and affect the achievement of strategy and business objectives. This is the COSO one. This is a good one. We like this, and I'll reinforce why we like this in just a second. This one, the combination of the probability of event and its consequence. Unfortunately, by the IRM, the Institute of Risk Management. I say unfortunately, and controversially, I think that's an awful definition of risk, because it just suggests that risk is purely risk analysis. In other words, likelihood impact on that matrix. That's what that suggests. Risk is an awful lot more. It's much more. This one, we'll come back to it later. The Orange Book is Her Majesty's Treasury in the UK. If you haven't read it, you can download it for free on the internet. Fantastic publication, because it takes most of the other intelligence that's out there about risk, puts it in very, very simple language, and presents it in a fantastic way. And finally, the Institute of Internal Auditors, again, goes on about uncertainty. However, those being the accepted definitions and established definitions of long-standing and august bodies based on risk management, we, as risk managers, and again, I don't apply this to all of you, but I would suggest that you've all come across this, rather than have uncertainty and probability and things like that in our definition of risk. I bet you've come across this. Risk is likelihood times impact. Well, I'm going to show you now why I don't think that is good enough. If we take a likelihood and try and break it down into sub categories of likelihood, we end up with something like this. Now, I've not invented this. This is taken from one of the companies I used to work in. I won't tell you which one. But it goes from highly unlikely to unlikely, possible, highly possible, probable, almost certain. Okay, here's my thing. Whenever you see a likelihood scale that's got that written in it, you can discount everything that comes before it. Everything before it is redundant. Possible. Is it possible, yes or no? Is it possible you could involve in a car crash on your way home tonight? No, I'm very careful. Is it possible you could get involved in a car crash because there's other drivers who aren't so careful as you. Yes, but I take a very quiet road. Yes, but is it possible that tonight that road isn't so quiet and you could get? Yes, okay, it's possible. Thank you. So forget about unlikely or highly unlikely. Is it possible? That's our start point. I'll come back to this in a minute. And then we get to possible and highly possible. What is the difference? What is the concept of highly possible? It's not even good English. It's highly possible. It's either possible or it isn't. You can't be a little bit pregnant. It's either yes or it's no. Probable. What does that mean? And here's my next one. Almost certain. Almost certain? We're dealing with risk. Risk is in uncertainty. So the more uncertainty you get over and the more certain you become, the less the risk. But here's what we do. We put almost certain, very little uncertainty, and we rank it as red, whatever red means. I don't like risk matrices. We'll come back to that in another talk. But so that doesn't work for me at all. So it didn't work for some other people as well, and they decided to just use an ordinal scale. I've seen this used quite a lot as well. Oh, you'll notice I'm not doing impact. Impact is a different discussion to have, and we'll be here all night. I started ripping apart the entire matrix, so let's just go with this. Okay, this one grades likelihood as A to F, or A to D, or A to E, whatever your matrix is. Okay, so let's say the likelihood is C. Likelihood of event, C. What does that tell me? All that tells me is that the likelihood of this event is less than D, and more than B. But for that to have any meaning, what does D mean? Well, D just means it's less than E. But what does E mean? And so on. So that doesn't work for me either. And I've seen this one as well. This is quite a common one. There's variations on the theme in this one. Has occurred in the past so many years. You also see has occurred in the industry, but not in my bit of it. You see this quite a lot as well. But this one has occurred in the past 5 years, has occurred in the past 5 to 10 years, etc., etc., etc. Here's my thing. If something occurred 30 years ago, and at the time it was big enough for you to do an incident investigation and put in now strategies where you're going to reduce either the likelihood or the probability of that event occurring in the future, and you've done that and you've audited all the controls, as you should do, you've changed your control environment, is the point. So you can't predict the probability of a future event based on an event that happened 30 years ago in an entirely different controlled environment. You've got a different environment now. It's 30 years on. The statistics don't make sense. And here's another thing. If it is now 10 years since the event that happened that you're concerned about, it's 10 years since the event, and you're in red here, high, category 1, whatever, and it's now New Year's Eve. Come midnight, it's now 11 years. So, sorry, 30 years, now New Year's Eve. Come midnight, now 31 years. So has your risk gone down from a high risk to a medium risk? And this is the problem with these kinds of subcategories of likelihood. Problem is, these interfaces don't work. They don't work. So let's try and reduce the number of interfaces and therefore reduce the problem. So I've seen this one. This is quite a common one. High, medium, low. Problem with this one is it gets desperately confusing because it's far too general, if this is the way we want to go. You've got a high. So we're in there. Okay, good. Now we've got a high, medium, but it's high. Here we've got a high, low, medium. And here, high, low, medium. And here we've got a low, high, medium. It gets terribly, terribly confusing. How do you describe a risk? Do you describe a risk as high, low, high, medium? I don't know. Here's an idea. Let's just get rid of these lines that are causing all this confusion. Let's just go back to the COSO definition and say, is our event likely to happen? And if the answer to that is yes, move on. Move on to the next stage of risk management and start saying, does it affect our objectives, etc., etc., etc. I'll come across a new model of risk management in a minute. But don't dwell on how likely is it. It doesn't make sense. Is it likely? Is it possible? Yes or no? And if it's yes, move on. Now, this is where I will be shot down as being a heretic, but I'm going to put up a defense here. I'm going to say I'm not actually a heretic because the relationship between probability and impact wasn't actually made in the risk management arena. It was made by Blaise Pascal again in the 18th century, where he related it to psychology. And what he was saying was that the fear of harm to a person, not to a company. The fear of harm ought to be proportional not only to the gravity of the harm, but to the probability of the event. What he's saying is that human beings are more scared about those events that are nearer to them than those events that are further away. So if you are in a city area with a very, very high crime rate, and it's the early hours of the morning, and you're walking through a very dark alleyway, you're concerned that you're going to get attacked by a gang of muggers who are going to beat you up and steal your wallet. You're not awfully worried about the fact that the city has massive high pollution levels and you could get cancer in the future, even though that one has a far, far greater impact. That's why it doesn't apply to, this doesn't apply to risk management, because in risk management we are interested mainly on what is the impact of events to the business, how does it impact our strategy, how does it impact our objectives, given the possibility it could happen. Right, secondly, I know many of you here will know this story, and just bear with me please while I try and tell the story to those that haven't. It's the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. Danish fairy tale writer, Hans Christian Andersen is his name. And there's a story, it's the Emperor's birthday coming up in a few weeks' time. And he wants to walk down the streets and have the entire population of the city out cheering and clapping and admiring him as their emperor. So he says, I want to get the best set of clothes for my birthday. So I want to get all the tailors in the world, I'm going to invite them in, and I'm going to choose the best cloth. So all these tailors line up outside his office. If emperors have offices, I'm not quite sure what they are. But anyway, there they are, all in a queue. And they come in one after one, and they go, there you are, that. And the other says, no, don't like it. I want something more expensive, I want something better. So the next guy comes in, and so on, you get the idea. So now the emperor's tearing his hair out, he's saying, no, this isn't for me, my birthday's next week, what am I going to do? And then a magician comes in, he's a magic tailor, and he comes in and he says to the emperor, I've got a material which is so good, it is the best in the world. However, only a fool cannot see it. So the king goes, right, okay, and the tailor goes, there you are. And of course shows him nothing. There you are. And the emperor says, oh, that's nice, because the emperor doesn't want to be seen to be a fool. So he gives the emperor gives the tailor the contract. Tailor goes away, easy money, and then comes back on the day of the king's birthday and says, Emperor, I've got your clothes, check them out. And the emperor goes, oh, they're nice, very nice, thank you, yes. Right, get undressed then, let's put them on. So the emperor gets undressed, he gets dressed in his birthday suit, that's where he came from, gets dressed in his birthday suit, and out he goes into the city, and everybody you can see clapping and cheering, look how good the king is, because they've been told by the emperor's men, do what the king says, chant, clear, admire his new birthday suit. So they're all out there admiring his new birthday suit. And then this little boy runs from the crowd and jumps in front of the emperor and points to him and looks at the crowd and he says, the emperor has got no clothes on. And suddenly the crowd all went, do you know what? He's right. The emperor has got no clothes on. And then they all changed and started laughing and the penny had dropped and so on and so forth. The point is that I think we're going to go back to this little boy because my question about that story, as much as I like it, is it doesn't actually tell you at the end what happened to the little boy. I'm sure I'll find out if enough people gang up on me. The second reason, So if we were to challenge these inbred concepts that have been around for far too long and people are too afraid to challenge them because they don't want to appear to be idiots, if we were to actually have the courage to do that and say, that's wrong, the king's got no clothes on, the world of risk management becomes so much more clear overnight. It's fantastic. All you have to do is ask 3 questions. First of all, let's get rid of those people, those critics that say, but with that approach you have to consider things like there's a meteorite going to land on the office. No, you don't. If a meteorite's going to land on the office, you've got no control of it, and you're all going to be dead anyway. So let's park that one. So let's get rid of these unreasonable events that you think are going to happen. And what we're left with now, we filtered them out, and we're left with just a portfolio, a bucket, if you like, of reasonable events that you need to consider. So the first thing you do is you ask yourself, is it possible? This is where Cosso's definition of risk comes in, which we'll get back to. Is it possible? If the answer to that is yes, it is possible that it will occur in the reporting period, you move on. If it's not possible, you dismiss it. You put it in that bucket with all the other unreasonable events. And then you say, okay, will it impact our objectives? If the answer to that is no, don't bother, dismiss it. And what you're left with after three simple questions is risks that are, events that are reasonable, possible, and will affect your objectives. Given that, you can then say, okay, if this risk is reasonable, if it's possible, and if it'll impact the objectives, let's look at the likely scenarios if that event materializes. Can we reduce the probability? Can we reduce the impact? Can we develop shall we develop a mitigation plan? So, what I'm saying is, we are not ignoring likelihood. We are just saying, do not subcategorize likelihood. Just ask the question, is it possible? And then move on to, will it impact objectives? And then you'll find that your risk register suddenly becomes grown up. And what you have is events that could occur in the time frame, consequences of their occurrence, what the impact scenarios are, what you're going to do about it, who's responsible for it, and when are they going to do it by. Obviously there's other things in there, like how much is it going to cost, where's the budget coming from, etc., etc., etc. But notice the following things. No likelihood rating, no impact rating, no risk rating. I don't need somebody to tell me what rating my risk is. I've got an impact scenario right in front of me here. I just got to read that. And I can work out, I'm a grown-up, I'm a manager. If I read that impact scenario, I don't want somebody telling me, but it's a high-low risk or a category 1 stroke category 2. I don't want to see that. I just want to look at the impact scenario. And finally, fourth thing, no risk matrix. So that is my proposition for future of risk management. Let's get back to basics. Let's just ask 3 questions. Is it reasonable? Is it possible? Can it impact objectives? And then let's reinvent the risk register. I'd like to finish by reminding you that you are completely improbable. And on your way home tonight, when you're driving your car on your way home, first of all, concentrate on your driving. But just be aware of the cars that pass you, the colour of those cars, the make of those cars, the speed of those cars, the place where that car actually overtakes you. Be aware of the birds that are sitting on the telegraph wires and ask yourself, what's the probability of that bird sitting right there, right now, at this time? Be aware of the cats, or even the fat rats coming out of manholes and streets in Germany. And just add all those things up and ask yourself, what's the probability of all these, given all the different possibilities